What happens when a man who has everything discovers the wife he cast aside is the one person he can't afford to lose? Tonight, we delve into the story of Jason Sterling, a real estate tycoon who believed he held the world in his palm. He had the power, the penthouse, and the perfect mistress on his arm. But at the most important gala of his career, a single haunting melody from a forgotten corner of the room will shatter his perfect illusion. He's about to see his pregnant wife singing for spare change, and that's not even the biggest shock of the night. Stay with us as a web of lies unravels, a secret legacy is revealed, and one woman's quiet strength brings an empire to its knees. The city of Cascade Bay glittered below Jason Sterling's penthouse office like a carpet of scattered diamonds. From 50 stories up, the world felt orderly, conquerable, an extension of his own will. At 36, Jason had sculpted his life with the same ruthless precision he used to acquire and develop prime real estate. Sterling Holdings wasn't just a company, it was a monument to his ambition, and he was its untouchable king. The final guest list for the Hope Gala. Mr. Sterling, his assistant, a nervous young man named Leo, placed the tablet on the vast mahogany desk. Jason didn't look up from the architectural model of his latest project, the Aura Towers. Any changes Mr. Marcus Thorne's office confirmed his attendance. He'll be giving the keynote address as the primary sponsor. A sliver of genuine pleasure cut through Jason's practiced indifference. Marcus Thorne, the reclusive, almost mythical titan of industry and philanthropy. Thorne's endorsement of the Hope Gala, a charity event that doubled as the unofficial launch party for the Aura Towers project, was a coup. It cemented Sterling Holdings not just as a financial power, but as a pillar of the city's elite. "Excellent," Jason murmured, tracing the sleek lines of the model tower. "And my personal arrangements? All confirmed. A table for 2 front and center. Ms. Rossie's car will arrive at 7. Jason finally looked up, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Isabella Rossi. She was as flawless as the glass on his towers, stunning sharp, and reflecting his own success back at him. She was the perfect accessory for a man of his stature, unlike Alina. A flicker of irritation crossed his face at the thought of his wife. His pregnant wife. The marriage, once a comfortable if passionless arrangement, had become a source of constant friction. Alina, who had once been so accommodating and serene, had become difficult. The pregnancy had transformed her. She was emotional, withdrawn, and worst of all, she had started questioning him, questioning his late nights, his business trips, his very nature. The tranquility of his home had been replaced by a tense silence he couldn't stand. 2 months ago, it had all come to a head, a receipt found in a coat pocket, a name Isabella glimpsed on his phone screen. The ensuing argument had been ugly. Alina's tears, her accusations, had felt like an assault on his peace. "I give you everything, Alina," he had boomed, his voice echoing in their cavernous, minimalist apartment. "This home, this life, what more could you possibly want?" "You," she had whispered, her voice trembling but her eyes filled with a new defiant clarity. "I wanted you, Jason, the man I married. Not this hollow shell." In his rage, he'd uttered the words that had severed their life together. "If this life is so hollow, then you're free to leave it. See how you fare in the real world with nothing." He had meant it as a threat, a way to shock her back into submission. He controlled the joint accounts, the credit cards, the very roof over her head. She had nothing in her own name. He expected her to crumble. Instead, she had simply looked at him, a profound sadness in her eyes, and packed a single bag. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. At first it was a relief. The silence in the apartment was once again peaceful, not tense. He'd told himself she'd come crawling back within a week, humbled and ready to accept the reality of their arrangement. But a week turned into a month, then 2. His pride, colossal and stubborn, forbade him from seeking her out. She had made her choice. Now he had Isabella, who understood the rules of the game. She didn't ask for his heart. She asked for a front-row seat to his success, and that was a currency he was happy to trade in. Isabella is on her way up. Leo's voice broke his reverie. Send her in. Isabella Rossi swept into the office, a vision in emerald green silk that clung to her like a second skin. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, severe bob, and her smile was a work of art, dazzling and utterly devoid of warmth. Darling, she purred, gliding across the room and draping herself over his chair, her expensive perfume filling the air. Staring at your kingdom. You look so powerful. She knew exactly what to say. She was an expert student of his ego. Just ensuring everything is perfect for tonight, he replied, accepting her kiss. Of course it will be perfect, she said, her fingers tracing the lapel of his tailored suit. We'll be the talk of the town. The powerful Jason Sterling and, well, me. She gave a little laugh. Everyone will finally see that you've moved on from that domestic situation. She never used Alina's name. To Isabella, Alina was a relic, an inconvenient footnote in Jason's story that was now thankfully over. She had watched Jason's marriage from a distance for a year, patiently waiting for a crack to appear. When she found her opening, she had been ruthlessly efficient. She offered Jason an escape, a world of glamour, excitement, and adoration, with none of the messy, emotional demands of a real relationship. The gala isn't about that, Jason said a little too sharply. It's about securing the final investors for the Aura project. It's about Marcus Thorne. And I will help you, Isabella said smoothly, sensing his slight annoyance. I know how to charm. I'll make sure every man in that room envies you, and every woman wants to be me. Marcus Thorne won't know what hit him. Jason relaxed. This was why she was perfect for tonight. She was a weapon in his social arsenal. She would be beautiful, charming, and utterly focused on the mission, solidifying his legacy. As they prepared to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his lawyer. Still no response from Alina's counsel regarding the initial divorce papers. It's like she's fallen off the face of the earth. Jason scowled and deleted the message. Let her hide. Tonight the world would see him soar untethered and more powerful than ever. He had his mistress on his arm, the city's most influential man, ready to sing his praises, and $1 billion project on the verge of triumph. He was Jason Sterling, and he had left his past and his pregnant wife far behind, in the dust. He had never been more wrong. The world for Alina Sterling had shrunk to the size of a single, cramped room in a part of the city she'd only ever seen from the tinted windows of a chauffeured car. The glittering skyline that Jason saw as his kingdom was for her a distant, mocking constellation. Her new home was a third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and windows that overlooked a grimy alley. But it was hers. The silence here wasn't tense. It was a sanctuary. Leaving Jason had been like stepping off a cliff. The first few days were a blur of shock and fear, spent on the couch of her only true friend in the city, Sarah. Sarah, a fiercely loyal and practical nurse, had been the one to hold her as she cried, not just for the end of her marriage, but for the loss of the man she thought Jason could be. "He cut you off completely." Sarah had asked her face a mask of fury as she handed Alina a cup of tea. Alina nodded, staring into the floral pattern of the borrowed mug. Every card, every account. He said to see how I'd fare with nothing. The humiliation of it still stung. That bastard Sarah seethed. "We'll sue him for everything. Spousal support, alimony. Alina, you're pregnant with his child." "No," Alina said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I won't fight him like that. I won't be the scorned wife begging for his scraps. If I take his money now, he'll think he was right that I can't survive without him. My baby will not be born into a world where its mother is seen as a victim." This resolve was a new, unfamiliar feeling. For years she had drifted in Jason's wake, her own identity slowly eroding. She had been a musician once, a singer with a soulful voice who played piano in smoky jazz clubs. She'd had dreams, but she fell in love with Jason's ambition, his drive, and she had willingly packed her dreams away to support his. He had loved her talent, he'd said, but he didn't love the life that came with it. The late nights, the low pay, the attention from other men. And so she had stopped. For him. Now with nothing left, that old part of her was all she had. "So what's the plan?" Sarah asked gently. "You need to eat for two, you need to pay rent. Pride is a wonderful thing, Alina, but it doesn't buy diapers." "I know," Alina whispered. She looked at her hands, the long, slender fingers that used to dance over piano keys. "I'm going to sing again." The decision was terrifying. Her confidence was a ghost. Her voice, once her pride, felt rusty and weak. But desperation was a powerful motivator. Sarah helped her find the small apartment and used her own savings to cover the first month's rent and deposit. Alina sold the few pieces of expensive jewelry Jason had missed when locking her out of the main safe, a pair of diamond earrings from her grandmother, a simple gold locket from her father. It was enough to buy a second-hand keyboard and a small portable amplifier. Her days became a routine of quiet determination. She practiced for hours, her voice slowly regaining its strength and tone. The melodies were tinged with a new melancholy, a depth of emotion she had never been able to channel before. She was no longer singing about love. She was singing about loss, survival, and the fragile flicker of hope. She started taking small cash-in-hand gigs, playing in coffee shops, quiet hotel lobbies, anywhere that would have her. The money was barely enough to survive on, but every dollar she earned felt like a victory. It was hers. One rainy afternoon, a call came from a man named Miguel, a booking agent she'd worked with years ago. "Alina." "I heard you were back in the game," he said, his voice warm. "I might have something for you. It's a bit last minute. A corporate gala. The regular string quartet cancelled. They just need some ambient music in the pre-function lounge. Easy money." A gala. Alina's stomach tightened. The world of galas felt 1,000,000 miles away, a life that belonged to another person. Yeah, some big charity thing. The Hope Gala, I think it's called, at the Grand Imperial Hotel. He named the fee, and Alina's breath caught. It was more than she made in 2 weeks. It would be enough to cover next month's rent and buy some essentials for the baby. "The lounge, you said?" "Not the main ballroom?" she asked, her voice small. "Now you'll be tucked away in a corner of the atrium lounge while the VIPs are arriving and having cocktails. You'll be background noise, honey. In and out before the main event even starts. No one will even notice you. No one will even notice you." The words were both an insult and a comfort. The anonymity was what sealed the deal. She wouldn't have to face the judging eyes of the city's elite. She would be invisible, a ghost at the feast, earning the money she so desperately needed. She didn't connect the name Hope Gala with Jason's latest venture. His projects had grand, impersonal names, and she had tuned out his business talk long ago. "I'll take it," she said, her heart pounding. On the evening of the gala, Alina stood before the small, cracked mirror in her bathroom. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a simple, long-sleeved black velvet maternity dress she'd bought at a consignment shop. It was elegant in its simplicity, but she felt a painful awareness of how different it was from the designer gowns that would fill the hotel tonight. Her growing belly was prominent, a constant reminder of the life that depended on her. She felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. It was fear. She thought about backing out. She could call Miguel, tell him she was sick, but then she placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the gentle flutter of movement within. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about her child. She would give this baby a life built on her own strength, not on a man's charity. She took a deep breath, grabbed her keyboard case, and walked out of her small apartment, heading towards the glittering world she had left behind, not as a guest, but as the help. She was walking back into the lion's den, completely unaware that the lion himself would be there waiting. The atrium lounge of the Grand Imperial Hotel was a masterpiece of ostentatious luxury. A cavernous space with a soaring glass ceiling, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, and a veritable forest of potted palms and white orchids. The air hummed with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and the low murmur of 100 conversations, all lubricated by wealth and influence. Jason Sterling stood near the grand entrance to the ballroom, a conquering hero in his element. With Isabella clinging possessively to his arm, he accepted compliments on the evening, on his suit, on his vision for the Aura Towers. Each word of praise was a balm to his ego, reinforcing his decision to excise Alina from his life. This was where he belonged. "Jason, my boy." A portly city councilman clapped him on the shoulder. "Spectacular event, truly. And this lovely lady," he said, beaming at Isabella. "You've outdone yourself." Isabella glowed under the attention. "Jason is the one with the vision," she said, her voice dripping with practiced admiration. "I'm just lucky enough to be beside him." Jason smiled. She played her part to perfection. His eyes scanned the room, looking for Marcus Thorne. He needed tonight to be flawless. Meanwhile, tucked away in a dimly lit alcove near the cascading water feature, Alina set up her small keyboard. She felt utterly invisible. The well-dressed guests flowed past her little corner, without a second glance, their laughter and chatter a world away from her own reality. Her instructions were simple play for 90 minutes, mostly instrumental. Keep it soft. A small empty brandy snifter sat on the edge of her keyboard, placed there by the event manager. "For tips if you're lucky," he'd said with a shrug. The gesture felt both kind and deeply humiliating. Her fingers, stiff with nerves, found the keys. She started with a soft instrumental piece, a familiar melody that helped calm her racing heart. The music was just as the manager had requested, background noise. A pleasant, forgettable soundtrack to the main event of networking and social climbing. For half an hour, she played, her gaze fixed on the black and white keys, creating a small, safe world for herself amidst the chaos of wealth. As the lounge began to thin out, with guests moving towards the ballroom. For dinner, Alina felt a little bolder. The knot of anxiety in her stomach had loosened. There were only a few stragglers left. She decided to sing one song, a soft, melancholy ballad she had written herself in the lonely nights in her apartment. It was a song about losing everything, only to find a different kind of strength. Her voice, hesitant at first, rose into the vast space. It was clearer, richer, and more full of raw, honest emotion than it had ever been. The chandeliers are dark to me now. The velvet ropes are made of stone. I walk a path I didn't choose, but I have never been more at home. Across the lounge, Jason was in a conversation with a potential investor, Isabella smiling brightly beside him. He was mid-sentence when the voice cut through the air. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible beneath the remaining chatter. But it was a voice he knew as well as his own heartbeat. A voice he hadn't heard in months, except in the echoes of angry arguments. He faltered, losing his train of thought. "Jason." "Is something wrong?" Isabella asked, her grip on his arm tightening. "No, nothing," he said, shaking his head, trying to dismiss it. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the acoustics, a memory playing games with him. But then the voice swelled, filled with a pain and resilience that was utterly captivating. And in the silence, I can hear a promise, whispered, soft and low. A tiny heart that beats with mine. A seed of hope begins to grow. The investor's voice faded into a meaningless drone. Jason's blood ran cold. He slowly turned his eyes, scanning the room past the clusters of tuxedoed men and sequined women towards the sound. And then he saw her. In the shadows of the alcove, illuminated by the soft glow of a single uplight, was Alina. His Alina. Her face was pale, her eyes closed as she sang her hands, moving gracefully over the keyboard. And there, starkly visible beneath the simple black dress, was the undeniable, prominent curve of her pregnancy. His child. On the keyboard in front of her, catching the light, was the empty brandy snifter. For tips. The world tilted on its axis. Every ounce of air was sucked from Jason's lungs. The triumphant king of the gala was suddenly a man drowning in a sea of shame, rage, and a bewildering sense of loss. This was not the broken, desperate woman he had imagined crawling back to him. This was a stranger, beautiful and tragic, singing her heart out for spare change in the lobby of his own victory party. The humiliation was so profound, so absolute, it was physically painful. He felt the eyes of the entire world on him, even though no one else was looking. Isabella, noticing the color drain from Jason's face, followed his stunned gaze. Her eyes landed on Alina. For a moment there was confusion, then dawning recognition. A slow, cruel smile spread across Isabella's lips. She saw the scene not as a tragedy, but as a triumph, the final pathetic degradation of her rival. She squeezed Jason's arm, a gesture of victory. "Well, well," she whispered, her voice, a venomous purr meant only for him. "Look at that, singing for her supper. I guess the real world wasn't as kind as you were, darling." Her words were meant to be a comfort, a confirmation that he had chosen the winner. But to Jason they sounded like a death knell. He wasn't looking at a defeated woman. He was looking at the ruin he had created at the mother of his unborn child, forced into the most public and painful humiliation imaginable. And he had put her there. The thought was a dagger to his soul. The song ended. The last note hung in the air, filled with a devastating grace, before being swallowed by the opulent silence of the lounge. Alina opened her eyes, and for a heart-stopping second, her gaze met Jason's across the polished marble floor. In her eyes, he didn't see hatred or a plea for help. He saw a profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of someone who had expected nothing better from him, and he had met her expectations perfectly. Then she looked away, breaking the connection as if he were just another stranger in the crowd. The dismissal was more painful than any accusation. The spell was broken. The last few guests began to drift away, leaving the lounge nearly empty. Alina began to quietly pack her things, her movements precise and deliberate, as if she were holding herself together by sheer force of will. Jason remained frozen, a statue of regret, the triumphant evening crumbling into ash around him. The grand doors to the ballroom swung open, and the warm glow from within spilled out into the cooler, dimmer space of the atrium lounge. A wave of polite anticipatory applause washed over the marble floors. The dinner service was complete. The main event, the part of the evening that truly mattered for men like Jason Sterling, was about to begin. On the large video screens mounted near the entrance, the image resolved to show a distinguished silver-haired man stepping up to a podium. Marcus Thorne. Isabella, who had been impatiently watching Alina pack her last cable, instantly shifted into high alert. Her entire posture changed, becoming taut with ambition. She gripped Jason's arm, her perfectly manicured nails pressing into the fine wool of his suit. "Jason, darling." "It's starting," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent hum. "That's him. He's about to speak. We need to be in there, right at the front, where he can see us when he's finished." But Jason's attention was elsewhere. He was transfixed by the pathetic yet oddly dignified tableau in the alcove. Alina was methodically coiling a power cord, her movements precise and contained, as if she were focusing on this one simple task to keep herself from shattering. She was 1,000,000 miles away, lost in her own private world of quiet shame. The sight both repulsed and fascinated him. It was the living, breathing evidence of his power over her life, and yet there was a resilience in her posture that he found infuriating. Jason Isabella insisted, giving his arm a sharp tug. "Forget about that. This is our moment. This is for the Aura Towers. This is for us." "I'm not moving," Jason stated, his voice flat. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a primal need to witness the end of this scene, to see her finally disappear out of the service exit, a ghost vanishing from his gilded world. On the screens, Marcus Thorne adjusted the microphone, his calm, authoritative presence commanding silence from the hundreds of guests inside the ballroom. His voice, amplified, was a rich, sonorous baritone that carried easily into the lounge. "Good evening," Thorne began his opening words, standard gala fare. "It is a pleasure to be here to support the Hope Foundation and to celebrate the spirit of philanthropy that makes this city great. We gather tonight in this magnificent hotel, a testament to what can be built with vision and capital to raise funds for those who have little of either." Isabella preened, smiling as if Thorne were speaking directly to her and Jason. "He's brilliant," she breathed. "So commanding." In her corner, Alina paused, her hands still. She couldn't help but hear the speech. She just wanted to leave, to melt away into the anonymity of the night, but the voice from the ballroom held her captive. She kept her back to the room, hoping her smallness would render her invisible. Thorne continued, his tone shifting subtly, becoming more personal. "But I don't want to talk about buildings tonight. I want to talk about foundations, not the concrete and steel that hold up our skyscrapers, but the personal foundations that hold up our lives' integrity, loyalty, and promises kept." Jason shifted his weight, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He hated these sentimental philosophical speeches. They were inefficient, a waste of time that could be better spent networking. He wanted Thorne to get to the point, to praise Sterling Holdings, to endorse the Aura project, to cement Jason's position at the apex of the city's business community. Decades ago, Thorne's voice grew quieter, more reflective, drawing the audience in. I was a young man with more ambition than sense, and I was lucky enough to have a partner, a man who was more than a partner. He was my conscience, my North Star. He was the most brilliant engineer I ever knew, but his true genius was in his character. He was kind, he was honorable, and he believed that the true measure of a man's success was not the size of his bank account, but the strength and love within his family. His name was William O'Connell. The name dropped into the quiet lounge like a physical object. In the alcove, Alina's entire body went rigid. A sharp, audible gasp escaped her lips, and her hand flew to her chest, pressing against her heart, as if to keep it from beating out of her body. William O'Connell, her father, her vibrant, loving, long-dead father. A torrent of memories flooded her, his laugh echoing in their old house, the smell of sawdust on his clothes, the feel of his hand engulfing hers. What was happening? Why was Marcus Thorne a man she hadn't seen since she was a teenager? Speaking her father's name at a gala hosted by the company of the man who had just destroyed her life. The disconnect was so vast, so jarring it made her feel dizzy. Jason barely registered the name. It was vaguely familiar, perhaps, from some old documents of Alina's he'd had his lawyers file away. But it meant nothing to him. It was ancient history irrelevant. Isabella, however, was growing impatient. "Who's William O'Connell?" she whispered dismissively. "Honestly, these old titans love to reminisce. I hope he wraps this up soon." But Thorne was not wrapping up. He was leaning forward, his gaze intense, even on the video screen. "William was taken from us far too soon in a tragic accident, and he left behind a legacy of innovation that became the bedrock of my own success. But more importantly, he left behind a daughter, a little girl with her father's brilliant mind and her mother's beautiful, soulful voice." Alina began to tremble, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her keyboard. He was talking about her. The private, sacred grief she carried was being laid bare in this palace of glass and greed. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if a spotlight had been thrown upon her in her dark corner. Before he died, Thorne's voice was thick with an emotion that was undeniably real. I made him a promise. I promised I would always look out for his little girl, that I would be a guardian for her, a protector in my stead. It is the single greatest regret of my life that through the chaos of the years, through my own self-absorption and the distance of time, I failed in that promise. I lost touch with her. A promise unkept is a heavy burden for an old man to carry." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I came here tonight to endorse a new real estate project. But I find myself thinking instead about the most valuable real estate on earth, the ground of integrity upon which we stand. Are we building our lives on solid rock, or are we building on sand, ready to be washed away by the first storm?" He offered a clipped formal thank you to Sterling Holdings and stepped back from the podium. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Isabella was energized, her focus absolute. "Okay, he's finished. He'll be coming out that main door. Let's move." Now Jason Thorne did indeed exit the ballroom, shaking one or two hands perfunctorily as he stepped back into the lounge. Immediately, a small phalanx of the city's most important figures. The mayor, 2 councilmen, a rival developer, began to move towards him, their faces arranged in masks of eager deference. But Marcus Thorne had the unique ability to make powerful men feel insignificant. He raised a hand, a gesture that was not a request, but a command, and the swarm of sycophants froze in its tracks. He did not smile. His face was a thunderous mask of grim determination. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room with an unnerving intensity. They bypassed the mayor, dismissed the councilman. They swept right past Jason and Isabella as if they were nothing more than decorative statues. He was looking for someone. And then his gaze locked onto the alcove, onto the lone, trembling woman in the simple black velvet dress. The atmosphere in the lounge shifted. The air grew thick, charged with an invisible electricity. Marcus Thorne, a man whose time was valued in the thousands of dollars per minute, began to walk. Not toward the exit, not toward the bar, but straight across the vast expanse of polished marble. Each step was deliberate, purposeful, echoing slightly in the stunned silence. From Alina's perspective, the world seemed to slow down. This legendary figure, this ghost from her father's past, was gliding towards her. It didn't feel real. He must be heading for a private exit behind her, she thought. He couldn't possibly be walking towards her. But he kept coming, his eyes fixed on hers, and in their depths she saw a flicker of recognition, then shock, then a dawning, terrible sorrow. He stopped directly in front of her. He was taller than she remembered, more imposing. He looked at her face, pale and tear-streaked. His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, then to the worn keyboard case, and finally to the ultimate symbol of her degradation, the empty brandy snifter sitting on her amplifier. A flicker of something cold and furious passed through his eyes. "Alina," he said, his voice now, a low, gentle rumble that was somehow more powerful than his amplified speech. Alina O'Connell, she could only manage a choked, almost inaudible sound, nodding as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "My dear girl." He breathed the words laden with years of unspoken regret. He looked past her for a fleeting second, his gaze sweeping over Jason, and a look of cold, hard understanding settled on his face. He looked back at Alina. "Oh, my child, what has happened to you? Why didn't you ever call me?" Before she could even think to answer, he did something that sent a seismic shockwave through the room. Marcus Thorne, the untouchable titan. The kingmaker of Cascade Bay reached out and pulled her into a firm, protective, paternal embrace. He wrapped his arms around her, shielding her small frame with his own, tucking her head against his shoulder as if to protect her from the prying eyes of the entire world. It was not a polite hug. It was an act of public reclamation, and in that moment, the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Jason Sterling. O'Connell. Alina O'Connell, the co-founder of Thorne's original company, the old tech stocks in her trust. A trust he controlled. The man wasn't just a family friend. He was her godfather. The ground beneath his feet didn't just feel like sand. It felt like a gaping abyss opening up to swallow him whole. He had married not just a woman with a modest inheritance, but the sole heir to a foundational fortune, the beloved goddaughter of the most powerful man he had ever hoped to meet. And he had cast her out to sing for tips. The wave of nausea that hit him was so intense, he had to grip a nearby table to steady himself. This was not a setback. This was not a miscalculation. This was annihilation. But his internal collapse was silent. Isabella's was anything but. She stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her perfect makeup unable to hide the ghastly, pale shock on her face. Her mind, which processed the world in a ruthless calculus of power, status, and advantage, was short-circuiting. The pawn she had been mocking all night had just been revealed as the queen. The man she had identified as the ultimate prize had just aligned himself body and soul with her enemy. Her entire strategy, her life's ambition, had been built on seducing and securing Jason Sterling, a man she saw as a king. But in that instant, she saw him for what he now was, the court jester who had drunkenly insulted the true monarch. Her future didn't just crumble, it was detonated. The visions of penthouses, yachts, and front-row seats at fashion shows evaporated, replaced by the horrifying image of Marcus Thorne's cold, disapproving eyes. The social ladder she had been so desperately climbing had been kicked out from under her, sending her into a free fall. The air in her lungs seemed to vanish. The glittering lights of the lounge began to blur, collapsing into a dark tunnel. The muffled sound of her own frantic heartbeat pounded in her ears. A strangled, pathetic whimper escaped her lips. Her eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated terror, rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled, and with all the grace of a puppet whose strings had been cut, Isabella Rossi collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving marble floor in a heap of emerald silk and shattered dreams. The polished silver doors of the service elevator slid shut, eclipsing the image of Alina's tear-streaked but resolute face. For Jason, it was as if the sun had been permanently extinguished, plunging him into an immediate and chilling twilight. The faint whir of the elevator's ascent was the sound of his entire world being lifted away from him, leaving him stranded on the cold marble floor of his own ruined monument. The commotion around Isabella was a distant, irritating buzz. Paramedics, efficient and impersonal, had helped her into a sitting position. Her face was a wreck of smeared mascara and blotchy skin. Her previous glamour vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate panic. Her eyes found Jason's across the now cavernous space, and she stumbled to her feet, shrugging off the paramedic's steadying hand. "Jason," she hissed, her voice a ragged tear in the heavy silence. She stalked towards him, her movements jerky and unbalanced. "Did you see that? Did you hear him? This is your fault, you and your pathetic, secretive little wife." Jason looked at her, but he didn't truly see her. He saw a symptom of his own disease, a fatal attraction to surfaces, to reflections of his own ambition. Isabella had been a mirror, and now that mirror was shattered, showing only the ugly reality beneath. "My fault," he repeated, his voice dangerously low, a stark contrast to her screeching. "You were the one who laughed. You called her pathetic. You stood beside me and gloated while the mother of my child was being publicly humiliated. You saw weakness, Isabella. Marcus Thorne saw strength. That is the difference between you and him. It's the difference between failure and power." Her face contorted in disbelief, then rage. "How dare you? I did this for us. I was cementing our place." "There is no us," Jason said, the words falling from his lips with the finality of stones dropping into a well. "There is only you and the consequences of your choices, just as there is only me." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He heard a strangled sob behind him, the sound of her heels clicking away in a frantic, undignified retreat. She was swept away by the current of her own social ruin, a footnote in a story that was now entirely about him, Alina and the Titan, whose enmity he had so spectacularly earned. The whispers started then, rising like smoke from the embers of the evening. They were quiet, but they carried. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, no longer with admiration or envy, but with a morbid, pitying curiosity. The city councilman, who had clapped him on the back earlier, now pointedly turned to discuss the floral arrangements with his wife. A banker whose funding was critical for the Aura Towers project suddenly found an urgent reason to check his phone, his face a grim mask. Jason was no longer a host or a visionary. He was a contamination, a walking scandal to be avoided at all costs. He left without a word, slipping through a side exit like a trespasser. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur. The glittering city lights, which had once filled him with a sense of ownership, now seemed to mock him, each light a star in a galaxy to which he no longer belonged. The silence in the vast apartment was a physical weight. It was no longer the peaceful, orderly silence he had once craved, but a dead, suffocating vacuum. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. The first call was from his assistant, Leo, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, the board members for the Henderson acquisition have indefinitely postponed the final signing meeting." It was the first domino. By noon, 3 more multi-million-dollar deals had been similarly postponed. By the end of the day, an online financial journal had published an article titled "Scandal at the Sterling Gala Tycoon's Empire Shaken as Marcus Thorne Intervenes." The story was speculative, but damning, painting a picture of marital cruelty and a dramatic public confrontation. His name, once a byword for success, was becoming synonymous with scandal. A week later, a courier delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope. It bore the letterhead of the most prestigious and feared law firm in the country, Thorne, Alistair and Finch. Inside, the language was precise, merciless, and utterly terrifying. It informed him of a comprehensive forensic audit of all marital assets, citing a breach of fiduciary duty concerning the management of Alina O'Connell Sterling's inheritance. It spoke of gross negligence and deliberate misallocation of funds for high-risk personal ventures. It was a declaration of war, meticulously drafted to dismantle him piece by piece. He tried to fight back. He called his own lawyers, blustering about slander and invasion of privacy, but they were cowed. Jason, his lead counsel, had said, his voice strained, "You don't seem to understand. This isn't a negotiation. This is Marcus Thorne. We can delay, we can mitigate, but we cannot win. He has unlimited resources and, from the looks of it, a deeply personal motivation. Our best strategy is to limit the damage." The damage, however, was a flood. He sat in a glass-walled boardroom, trying to project an aura of calm confidence to a consortium of Japanese investors, but they weren't looking at him. They were glancing at each other, their faces impassive. One of them slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a new article, this one from a society blog, featuring a paparazzi photo of Alina, visibly pregnant, walking into Marcus Thorne's office building. The headline was simple: "O'Connell heiress takes refuge with Godfather." The deal was dead before he even opened his mouth. Desperation began to set in. He drove to Sarah's neighborhood, the one place he thought Alina might be. He parked down the street, feeling like a stalker. He saw Sarah leave for work. He waited, his heart pounding, hoping for a glimpse of Alina. Instead, he saw a black town car with tinted windows pull up to the building. A man in a crisp suit, clearly a professional security guard from Thorne's personal detail, got out and stood watch at the entrance. The message was clear: she was protected, and he was locked out. The fortress was real. The following months were a slow, grinding descent into ruin. To stay solvent, he was forced to sell off assets, first the art from his office, then a boutique hotel project, then a parcel of undeveloped land he had been saving. Each sale was a piece of his identity being carved away. He became a recluse in his glass tower, the city below a constant, painful reminder of everything he had lost. It was a cold Tuesday morning, 6 months after the gala, when he saw the magazine. It was on the coffee table in his deserted reception area, left behind by a cleaning crew. Cascade Bay, Legacy and Finance Monthly. And on the cover was Alina. She was not the pale, haunted woman from the gala, nor the quiet, accommodating wife from his memories. This Alina was radiant. She was standing at a podium, her hair styled elegantly, her face alive with passion and purpose. She wore a tailored blue dress, and in her eyes was a fire he had never seen before, or perhaps had simply refused to acknowledge. The headline blared, "The O'Connell Legacy Reborn. Alina O'Connell Thorne launches Arts Foundation." His hands trembled as he picked it up. He read every word. The article detailed her quiet, strategic takeover of her own finances under the guidance of her godfather Marcus Thorne, whose name she had hyphenated with her own, erasing Sterling forever. It described her father, William O'Connell, and the true extent of the tech patents and foundational shares that made up her inheritance, a fortune Jason had arrogantly underestimated and recklessly used. The centerpiece of the article was the launch of the William O'Connell Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing grants and performance spaces for emerging musicians, the very kind of artist she had once been, the kind he had implicitly forced her to abandon. Then he saw the other photo, a full-page spread inside. It was Alina, sitting on a sun-drenched lawn, a large oak tree behind her. In her arms, nestled against her, was a baby swaddled in a soft white blanket. A son. His son. The caption read, "Alina O'Connell Thorne, with her son William, the inspiration behind her new philanthropic mission." William. She had named him after her father. A legacy passed down, a line of integrity he had no part in. The name was a statement, a final definitive severing of their connection. This child belonged to the O'Connell legacy, to the Thorne protection, not to the disgraced Sterling name. He stared at the photograph until the images blurred. The baby's tiny, perfect hand. The look of profound, unconditional love on Alina's face. He had seen that look once, long ago, directed at him. He had taken it for granted, treated it as his due, and had ultimately crushed it. In that moment, the full, crushing weight of his failure descended. It wasn't about the lost money or the failed business. It wasn't about the public shame or the loss of power. It was the realization of what he had truly destroyed. He had been given a gift, a woman of substance, talent, and quiet strength, a chance at a family, a connection to a real and honorable legacy. And he had traded it all for a hollow empire of glass and steel, and for the fleeting validation of superficial people like Isabella. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His reflection stared back at him, a pale, gaunt figure, utterly alone in a vast, empty room. Below, the city glittered on, indifferent. He had wanted to own it all, to be its king. Now he was just a ghost, haunting a gilded cage. He looked from his lonely reflection to the magazine in his hand, at the picture of the mother and child, who represented a vibrant, hopeful future. He had lost his wife. He had lost his son. He had lost his honor. Jason Sterling, the man who prided himself on calculating the value of everything, finally understood the meaning of true bankruptcy. He had nothing left at all. And so Jason Sterling's gilded empire, built on a foundation of lies, was brought down not by a market crash or a corporate takeover, but by the quiet strength of the woman he threw away. Alina's story is a powerful reminder that true wealth is not in what you own, but in who you are, and that integrity is a currency that never loses its value. She lost a husband, but she found her voice, her legacy, and a future for her child built on her own terms. What did you think of this incredible twist of fate? Who was the real villain in this story? The cheating husband or the ambitious mistress? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of poetic justice and ultimate vindication moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of drama, betrayal, and triumphant revenge. Thanks for listening.